But speaking of the royal gospel, how would you put the gospel in one sentence?
Well, the quickest sentence I would use if I was to just do one sentence would be Jesus is the saving king, or Jesus is the rescuing king, Jesus is the forgiving king. Just some way of I'm trying to capture two ideas in that sentence. Like on the one hand, that he's the king. All right, that's the basic gospel fact. Jesus is the Christ. That's the most consistent summary of the gospel in the New Testament. You look at like what's the gospel? Like whenever our New Testament authors do it, they're going to like say Jesus is the Christ is going to be their briefest summary they give. I think it is important to qualify that, to describe what kind of king he is, like that he's a king who brings rescue in some way. And so that would obviously be trying to highlight statements like in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5, where it talks about like him dying for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, or things like that. Like that in that action, like he's in some way rescuing. But it also would link to other models of atonement, right? Of him winning the victory over death and over sin and over evil spiritual powers. So it kind of connects to the Christus Victor model, or could be connected in that way. So I think that's a helpful way of starting, in terms of just giving the most brief definition of the gospel we can, because it really does like accomplish like the rescuing or healing dimension of the gospel, but also like his kingship.
And yeah, this goes beyond one sentence a little bit. You've also done quite a bit of work on what is the basic content of the Bible as...
Do you mean the content of the gospel, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the basic content of the gospel. Yeah, so it does go beyond the idea of Jesus just being the Christ. Obviously, we want to fill that out with a larger narrative, and I think it's important to recognize it is a narrative. It does take a storied shape. And the easiest way to remember it is to remember that the storied shape is kind of a V-shaped pattern, right? That it's, and that insight is not new to me. Lots of people have described this trajectory, right? Where if you wanted to break it into three stages, you could maybe talk about the incarnation, you could talk about the crucifixion, and you could talk about the resurrection unto enthronement, right? Like that, that would be a way of kind of like getting the three parts, like Jesus begins in glory alongside the Father, right? And then he's dispatched on a divine mission. So the Father sends the Son to take on human flesh, and does so in a very specific promise-fulfilling way into the line of David. So the incarnation is central to the gospel, and it often gets neglected. It will often in our church traditions affirm the gospel, of course, affirm the incarnation, of course, but we often don't see it as part of the gospel. We'll tend to focus on the cross, which is indeed part of the gospel, right? But if we miss the incarnation, we begin to miss the logic of the gospel, which is that Jesus is taking on human flesh, not just to die for our sins, but also to become the ideal ruler, and also the ideal human, so we can see what it means to be fully human, and also so that once he's crucified and raised to reign, there's a human who's now ruling the cosmos. Jesus is like taken on human flesh, and so now like the cosmos is receiving the proper image bearing that it was designed to receive, as humans are made in God's image in order to bear his image correctly into creation. It's an active idea. That isn't happening until, at least in the full sense, until we have the model human, the model king, who then begins to do this, and then we then can get united into that rule by our own transformation into the image of Christ. So anyway, yeah, the full gospel involves obviously the idea that the Father sent the Son to take on human flesh, then he dies for our sins in accordance with the scriptures. He's buried, which is really talking about the reality of his death, right? And then he's raised on the third day, accordance with the scriptures, and then he's seen, like he's witnessed, right? People see him, and then after that, then we get the part that I think gets neglected also, like incarnation gets neglected, but enthronement, right? Then he's raised to the right hand of the Father, where he begins to rule, and then the Father and the Son send the Spirit, and then there will be a final judgment. So the sending of the Spirit, right, helps kind of like connect the Trinitarian pieces too. That the gospel is about the Father who sends the Son, so that the Father and the Son then can send the Spirit.